Reese Malone and Darren Daz Hughes were just two kids from Liverpool's roughest streets, until they built a billion-pound drug empire that tore the city apart. What started as petty theft spiraled into a violent power struggle that challenged the oldest crime families, ignited bloodshed across the city, and exposed a criminal web darker and deeper than anyone imagined. This is the story of ambition, betrayal, and the deadly rise of Liverpool's most feared drug lords. In the early 2000s, Liverpool was a city trying to move on from its troubled past. The docks that once bustled with trade were quieter now, many of them converted into modern apartments or museums. The regeneration efforts had painted the city in brighter colors, with tourists visiting the Cavern Club and students filling up university campuses. But beneath the surface, the old shadows had never truly gone. In the housing estates just beyond the city center, poverty lingered. Unemployment was high, especially among the youth, and for many the dream of a better life seemed distant. It was in these forgotten corners that the first sparks of a new criminal era began to glow. For decades, Liverpool had been a key entry point for drugs into the UK. Its ports were among the busiest in the country, and criminal syndicates had long used the chaos of shipping to move heroin, cocaine and cannabis in and out. But by the early 2000s, the dominant crime families had grown complacent. The McCanns, O'Haras and Keatings, names once whispered in fear, had grown older, wealthier and more secretive. They operated behind closed doors, relying on loyal lieutenants and bribed officials to keep things moving smoothly. Violence was rare, and when it happened, it was quiet, clinical. The days of turf wars and public executions were thought to be over. That false sense of calm allowed something new to grow, something younger, hungrier, and more reckless. On the south side of the city, in the district of Toxteth, a group of teenagers had begun carving out a reputation. At first, they were little more than a street crew. They rode stolen scooters, wore black balaclavas, and filmed petty crimes to post online. They called themselves the Dock Boys, a nod to both their location and their ambition. Unlike the older gangs, they didn't respect the old rules. They weren't interested in staying low-key. They wanted to be feared, to be rich, and to be seen. What made them dangerous wasn't their violence, it was their adaptability. They weren't bound by tradition. They were digital natives, fluent in social media, encrypted messaging, and online black markets. They learned quickly, moved faster, and had no loyalty to the established order. While the older families were guarding their secrets, the Dock Boys were gathering information, watching dock schedules, and planning their first major move. The city's crime bosses dismissed them as loud kids with no discipline. They didn't see the threat coming, and by the time they realized what was happening, it was already too late. Liverpool's streets had changed. The new generation wasn't waiting for permission. They were taking everything. The Dock Boys began as just another group of restless teenagers trying to survive in a city that offered them little. Most came from broken homes, raised in high-rise flats where opportunity felt like a myth. They bonded over shared frustrations and a hunger for something more: money, respect, and power. Their early crimes were small but bold. They started by stealing mopeds, robbing delivery drivers, and intimidating corner dealers. Their reputation grew quickly, not just for what they did, but how they did it. They filmed everything. Each theft, each beating, each close escape was recorded and circulated through encrypted channels, turning the gang into something of an underground spectacle. But what really separated the Dock Boys from other local crews was their curiosity. They were drawn to the docks not just because they lived nearby, but because they understood what others didn't. Liverpool's shipping industry wasn't just a relic of the past. It was a gold mine. Massive metal containers arrived daily from South America, West Africa, and mainland Europe, often with little inspection. The Dock Boys began paying attention to the flow of goods. They studied shift patterns, learned which containers sat longest, and even hacked into online scheduling systems. They weren't just stealing blindly anymore. They were planning. Their first major hit came almost by accident. A friend of a member tipped them off about an unguarded container left overnight on a side dock, marked as carrying textiles. Inside, beneath stacks of fabric, they found over 20 kilos of pure, uncut cocaine. It was a haul worth nearly £1 million on the street. In an instant, everything changed. They weren't just a street gang anymore. They were players in a much larger game. With that one discovery, the dock boys tasted real power. They moved quickly, selling the cocaine in smaller portions to trusted dealers across the city. They kept their operation tight, only working with people they had known for years. The profit was immediate and life-changing. Designer clothes replaced tracksuits, flash cars replaced mopeds, and their social media was suddenly flooded with cryptic posts, flaunting wealth without explanation. Other gangs started paying attention, so did the police. More importantly, their success drew the attention of the old crime families who had long controlled the port's drug trade. To them, the dock boys were reckless amateurs poking around where they didn't belong. But the young gang didn't care. They believed they were smarter, faster, and hungrier. And for the first time in years, the streets of Liverpool weren't controlled by men in suits. They were ruled by boys in hoodies with encrypted phones and nothing to lose. The rise of the dock boys didn't go unnoticed for long. Their sudden wealth, flashy lifestyle, and growing influence sent ripples through Liverpool's criminal underworld. The older syndicates had spent years building quiet empires, carefully avoiding attention. They paid off officials, moved product without noise, and kept violence to a minimum. The dock boys disrupted that balance. They weren't discreet. They were loud, fast, and gaining ground. But success always comes at a cost. Their first payment came in blood. The McCann Syndicate, one of Liverpool's most powerful and established crime families, controlled the port's drug flow for decades. Their operation was efficient, brutal when necessary, but mostly invisible. The dock boys' hijacking of the cocaine shipment wasn't just a financial hit. It was a challenge to their authority. At first, the McCanns tried to send a message the traditional way: intimidation, warnings through intermediaries, and pressure on local dealers. But the dock boys didn't back down. They were fearless, and more dangerously, they didn't understand the rules of the old game. They refused to show respect, and they refused to move. Then came the retaliation. One of the dock boys, a 19-year-old known for bragging online, disappeared after a night out in the Baltic Triangle. His body was found 3 days later, burned beyond recognition, in the boot of a stolen car abandoned in a scrapyard near the outskirts of the city. The murder wasn't just a hit, it was a statement. It was designed to be messy, brutal, and public. Word spread fast on the streets. The old guard was pushing back. The death shook the dock boys, but not in the way the McCanns had hoped. Instead of retreated, they grew more aggressive. The gang tightened its structure, cutting out loose ends and doubling down on security. Encrypted phones became standard, and internal rules were introduced. Every member was now accountable, and paranoia became a part of daily life. No one was safe from suspicion. At the same time, their violence escalated. 2 men linked to the McCanns were shot outside a kebab shop in the early hours of a Sunday morning. CCTV footage was mysteriously wiped, and witnesses claimed not to have seen a thing. In a matter of weeks, the streets became tense. Businesses with links to either side closed early. Even seasoned dealers teetered to worry. Liverpool hadn't seen open warfare like this in years. The first kill was a turning point. It shattered the illusion that the dock boys were just kids playing gangster. They were in a real war now, one that didn't care about age, reputation, or history. The city's balance of power was crumbling, and the streets were about to become battlegrounds. With one foot planted firmly in bloodshed and the other in ambition, the dock boys pushed forward, undeterred by death or threats. The murder of their member had hardened them. Rather than breaking apart, the gang evolved. They understood now that street-level crime wouldn't protect them. If they wanted to survive and win, they needed structure, strategy, and something the McCanns had perfected long ago: control of the supply chain. Their first move was the docks. Instead of randomly targeting containers, they began building a network inside the port itself. They approached disgruntled dockworkers with offers of cash, more than many would earn in 6 months. For those who hesitated, threats followed. It wasn't long before a small circle of insiders began working for the gang, feeding them schedules, codes, and access to containers marked for inspection. It was a crude but effective system. The dock boys now had eyes inside one of the UK's busiest ports. With consistent access came consistent shipments. Cocaine arrived hidden in crates of fruit, textiles, even children's toys. The dock boys didn't handle everything themselves. They were smart enough to outsource. Smaller gangs were brought in to handle unloading and distribution, each one carefully monitored and rotated to avoid leaks. The product moved fast, reaching cities across the north of England within days. Liverpool became the center of a much larger web, and Reese, the gang's unofficial leader, was at the center of it. Reese operated like no other gangster before him. He didn't attend meetings in pubs or dress in designer suits. He managed operations through burner phones and late-night drives in stolen cars. Money was funneled through shell companies in Eastern Europe. Cash was laundered through local barbershops, car washes, and vape stores. He rarely stayed in one place for more than a few nights and refused to let himself be photographed. While police still viewed the dock boys as a loud, reckless crew, the reality was far more dangerous. They had transformed into a highly organized and financially literate criminal business. The profits were staggering. Within 12 months, the dock boys were moving an estimated £20 million worth of drugs through Liverpool's port. Their lifestyle changed accordingly. High-end cars began appearing in poor neighborhoods. Members wore Rolex watches, booked penthouses in Manchester, and bragged in encrypted chat rooms about cash piles taller than toddlers. But with rapid growth came new risks. Competitors noticed. So did international suppliers. The dock boys were no longer just local troublemakers. They were rising players in a global network, and while they were expanding fast, they were also attracting attention from dangerous corners of the underworld. The criminal spotlight had shifted onto them, and in that spotlight, there's no such thing as safety. The violence didn't stay in the shadows for long. As the dock boys expanded their grip on Liverpool's drug trade, the streets began to feel the weight of their ambition. Shootings, once rare, became routine. The gang's boldness spread into areas that had long been under the silent control of older families, and their presence was impossible to ignore. What started in Toxteth spilled into Enfield, Walton, and even the leafy suburbs once considered untouchable. It was no longer about drugs. It was about domination. Tensions reached a breaking point when a key dock boys dealer was gunned down outside a primary school in Wavertree. He was ambushed mid-morning, in broad daylight, just minutes after dropping his younger sister off. The killing was swift and brutal. 2 shots to the chest, 1 to the head, and the message was clear: nowhere was safe. Panic gripped the community. Parents pulled their children from school and local politicians scrambled to respond. But behind the scenes it was understood this was a message from the old guard. The McCanns and their allies were no longer just reacting. They were lashing out, striking at weak points, and trying to expose cracks in the dock boys' operation. The older families still had resources, hitmen, spies, and decades of local influence, but they were fighting a new kind of war, and the dock boys were changing the rules. Instead of backing off, the gang doubled down. They increased their security, moved meetings online, and started using encrypted walkie-talkie apps to avoid surveillance. Their tactics were no longer just violent, they were tactical. The city's police force, already stretched thin, found itself overwhelmed. Traditional methods of surveillance and wiretapping were useless against burner phones and anonymous digital networks. Witnesses were too scared to talk. Victims refused to name suspects. Even when police did make arrests, no one would speak. It was a wall of silence, built on fear. A special task force was formed to target the dock boys, pulling resources from across Merseyside, but even they struggled to keep up with the pace of the violence. Meanwhile, the dock boys took the war to new levels. A Molotov cocktail was thrown into a bookmaker's shop known to be laundering McCann money. A McCann associate's house was raked with bullets while his children slept inside. Each attack was precise, symbolic, and public. The message was always the same: we are not afraid. But not everyone in the gang shared the same sense of invincibility. As the body count climbed and retaliation became more unpredictable, some members began to question how far things would go. The money was flowing like never before, but so was the blood, and there was no turning back. As the dock boys grew more levels, a Molotov cocktail was thrown into a bookmaker's shop known to be laundering McCann money. A McCann associate's house was raked with bullets while his children slept inside. Each attack was precise, symbolic, and public. The message was always the same: we are not afraid. But not everyone in the gang shared the same sense of invincibility. As the body count climbed and retaliation became more unpredictable, some members began to question how far things would go. The money was flowing like never before, but so was the blood, and there was no turning back. As the dock boys grew more powerful and violent, trust within the gang began to erode. Their rise had been fast, but it came with chaos. The pressure from rival families, the constant threat of raids, and the mounting paranoia from leadership created a dangerous atmosphere. Loyalty, once taken for granted among childhood friends, was now something to be tested. The gang had grown too large, too quickly, and cracks were beginning to form beneath the surface. Reese, still running the operation from the shadows, became obsessed with security. He changed phone numbers weekly, shifted stash houses every few days, and demanded that every meeting be held in different parts of the city. He suspected someone was leaking information. Too many shipments were getting intercepted. Too many safe houses were being raided. At first he blamed rival gangs or the police, but then something happened that changed everything. A shipment from Rotterdam, worth nearly 5 million founced from the port without a trace. No arrests, no news coverage, no bodies. Just gone. It didn't feel like a robbery. It felt like a setup. Behind closed doors, Reese ordered a quiet investigation into his own people. Members were followed, phones checked, family members questioned. Tensions ran high. Paranoia seeped through the gang like poison. 2 low-level runners were accused of cooperating with police. They were called to a supposed meeting in a warehouse on the edge of town. Neither one returned. Their disappearance sent a clear signal: suspicion alone was enough to get you killed. But the real mole wasn't at the bottom. He was someone close to the core. A long-time member, known for being quiet and reliable, had flipped. The McCanns had gotten to him months earlier with an offer he couldn't refuse: protection, cash, and a way out. In return, he provided access, shipment details, meeting locations, internal hierarchies. His betrayal wasn't just about money. He had grown tired of the violence, the constant fear, and the sense that the gang was spiraling out of control. But his decision would cost more than he expected. As the mole fed information to the McCanns, chaos within the dock boys intensified. Deals fell apart. Stashes disappeared. The police started appearing at the right place, at the worst time. Reese, now convinced of betrayal at the highest level, stopped trusting anyone. He surrounded himself with only 3 men and stopped attending meetings altogether. The gang that once prided itself on unity was now crumbling from the inside. Power, money, and paranoia had turned brotherhood into suspicion, and with every secret leaked, the McCanns grew stronger again, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The dock boys still ruled the streets, but for how much longer, no one could say. The unraveling of the dock boys gave the McCanns an opportunity they had been waiting for. After months of silence and shadow moves, the old syndicate emerged from the background with deadly precision. Their first major blow came in the form of fire. In the early hours of a foggy morning, a warehouse in Birkenhead erupted into flames. Fire crews arrived to find the entire structure engulfed. Inside were the charred remains of 3 senior dock boys enforcers, locked in a metal cage. It was a calculated strike, not just murder but humiliation. That single act sent shockwaves through the city's criminal underworld. The McCanns weren't just defending their turf anymore, they were declaring a counter-offensive. It was no longer about competition. It was about erasure. The old family had taken its time watching the Dock Boys rise, but now they were systematically dismantling everything they had built. Safe houses were exposed. Distribution lines were hijacked. Dock contacts disappeared or switched sides overnight. The McCanns were doing what they did best, applying pressure slowly and crushing without mercy. Then came the largest financial loss in the gang's short history. A convoy transporting 6 containers of cocaine, each one carefully tracked, timed, and guarded, was intercepted just after clearing customs. There were no police involved. No arrests were made. The containers vanished into thin air. A week later, CCTV footage, leaked to encrypted forums, showed McCann men unloading those exact containers in an industrial park outside Manchester. The footage wasn't meant for the police, it was meant for the Dock Boys. The message was simple: your empire is no longer yours. Panic spread within Reese's remaining circle. He became more reclusive than ever, refusing to speak to anyone outside his hand-picked security team. Communications were reduced to single-word messages. The structure that once made the Dock Boys powerful was crumbling into chaos. Mid-level dealers began defecting. Some went into hiding. Others offered information to rivals or the police in exchange for safety. The streets, once dominated by the Dock Boys, now felt uncertain. A new fear was growing, fear of the return of the old kings. Then, without warning, news broke that the McCann boss, the man who had orchestrated the retaliation, had boarded a private jet to Dubai under a false name. He had left the country with millions in cash and digital assets. It shocked even his closest allies. He hadn't just fled, he had abandoned the throne. There was no formal handover, no warning, just silence. His exit created a vacuum no one expected. The McCanns were leaderless. The Dock Boys were splintered. For a brief moment, there was no ruler in Liverpool's underworld, just open territory and blood in the air. And in the chaos that followed, the city held its breath. With the McCann boss gone and the Dock Boys in disarray, Liverpool's criminal underworld was without a clear leader. The city felt like it was on pause, as if everyone was waiting to see who would move first. In that power vacuum, Reese made his play. Still hidden from public view, he began quietly rebuilding his inner circle. He called in favors from former allies in Manchester and Birmingham, strengthened ties with contacts in Spain, and pushed for one final deal that would re-establish his dominance: a direct shipment from Colombia, bypassing all middlemen. The deal was ambitious, worth nearly £12 million, and dangerously public. Reese insisted on overseeing it, knowing that this shipment would either restore his credibility or expose him completely. The meet was set for a Friday night at a secluded industrial estate just outside of Bootle. His convoy consisted of 3 bulletproof vehicles, each carrying armed men. Drones were sent ahead to check for movement. Everything was planned down to the second. But it wasn't enough. As the convoy entered the estate, the lead car's tires exploded, planted spike strips hidden beneath a pile of debris. Within seconds, gunfire rained down from the rooftops. It was a military-style ambush. Automatic weapons tore through steel and glass. One vehicle crashed into a loading bay. Another flipped into a drainage ditch. Reese's driver was shot through the windshield before he could react. The air was filled with screams, bullets, and smoke. It was over in less than 2 minutes. 3 men were killed on the spot. 2 more were critically injured. Reese, bleeding from a wound to his leg, managed to crawl behind a stack of pallets before being pulled out by backup. Somehow he survived, but the damage was done. The shipment was gone. The attackers vanished without a trace. CCTV systems on nearby buildings had been disabled hours earlier. No shell casings were found. No fingerprints. No witnesses. Rumors spread fast. Some said it was a McCann faction acting alone, seeking revenge without permission. Others believed a new gang from outside the city had staged the attack. But there was another theory. one that sent a deeper chill through the underworld. Some whispered that the ambush had been arranged by someone above the streets, someone pulling strings at a level far beyond gangland. This wasn't just a hit, it was a takedown. In one night, Reese lost his men, his deal, and his power. The Dock Boys were now a ghost of what they had been. Their influence shattered, their reputation stained. The ambush wasn't just a failure, it was a warning. Whoever had orchestrated it had access, precision, and patience, and they weren't finished yet. The aftermath of the ambush left the Dock Boys reeling. Their confidence shattered, their grip on the city slipping. They faced enemies they barely understood, and a world that seemed to be closing in on them. Reese retreated further into the shadows, nursing his wounds and scrambling to keep what remained of the gang intact. But the landscape of Liverpool's criminal scene had shifted beneath their feet, and the old street rules no longer applied. Police activity intensified after the ambush. For the first time in years, multiple coordinated raids swept across the city simultaneously. Safe houses were raided, cash stashes seized, and key members arrested on charges ranging from drug trafficking to firearms possession. It was clear that law enforcement had been waiting for an opportunity to strike, and they took it. The Dock Boys, once untouchable, now found themselves scrambling to avoid jail. But even as arrests mounted, it became clear that the real battle was happening somewhere else. Behind the scenes, whispers spread about a far more powerful player moving into Liverpool's shadows. Unlike the Dock Boys or the McCanns, this entity wasn't interested in public displays of violence or street warfare. It operated with cold calculation, invisible to most and untouchable by law enforcement. Rumors pointed toward a criminal syndicate with international reach, connected to money laundering networks, corrupt officials, and even politicians. Some called it the Liverpool Mafia, though no one really knew who ran it. The ambush was just the beginning of a larger plan. By dismantling the Dock Boys, this hidden force cleared the way to control Liverpool's port and drug routes. The gang wars and turf battles had distracted the city's older crime families long enough for this new player to slip in unnoticed. Shipping containers no longer went missing. They arrived and disappeared at the hands of this mysterious network. Contacts in customs and law enforcement had reportedly been compromised for years, allowing vast quantities of cocaine and heroin to flow through without interruption. For Reese, the realization was devastating. He had spent years fighting for control, only to find himself a pawn in a game he didn't understand. His ambitions, his risk-taking, had drawn attention from a power far greater than any gang rivalry. Even some of his closest allies began to question their loyalty, unsure if survival meant continuing to fight or simply fading away. Liverpool was no longer just a city of gangs and drug lords. It was a city caught in the grip of a deeper, more dangerous criminal web, one that stretched far beyond its quiet streets and old docks. The bloodshed had been only the beginning. What lay ahead was something darker, more organized and far harder to escape. The brutal ambush marked the beginning of a new chapter in Liverpool's underworld, one where old rivalries gave way to a more insidious and deeply entrenched criminal empire. As the Dock Boys' power crumbled and the McCann family fled, or fractured, a shadowy syndicate stepped out of the darkness to claim control. This organization wasn't made up of street thugs or even the traditional crime families. It was a sophisticated network that operated through layers of secrecy, corruption, and violence. Investigations later revealed that this syndicate had infiltrated multiple levels of government, law enforcement, and port management. Their influence was so widespread that they could manipulate shipments, silence witnesses, and redirect millions of pounds of cocaine with little fear of being caught. For years they had watched the Dock Boys and McCanns battle it out, using the chaos as a smokescreen for their own operation. Reese, once the fearless leader of the Dock Boys, found himself a broken man. His empire, built on loyalty, bravado, and violence, was dismantled not by force but by a web of betrayal and infiltration. In the end, it wasn't bullets that took him down, it was the realization that the streets he thought he ruled were controlled by others. With his closest allies dead, imprisoned or turned, Reese vanished from public view, rumored to have fled the country or